All that being said, anybody else have anything else they want to talk about? I don't think there's anything else that I've seen. To be honest, I've been busy, to be perfectly honest. There are apparently rumors that the alleged Microsoft handheld is being put on the back burner to focus on third-party options first, which is kind of weird. I don't know. Microsoft's entire thing, their entire messaging is strange. This is let's have a fun conversation before we get started with Marvel Rivals, I think. That's what we're going to do. We're going to have a real fun conversation. Of the three platform holders, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, of the three of them, gaming nowadays, and I'm sure y'all all can agree with me, right? Gaming nowadays is so weird. It's so strange right now. We have so many different problems. Pricing is going up, developers getting shut down, games getting canceled left and right, layoffs everywhere. There's so many things going on. And to a degree, I almost expect the platform holders to kind of lead by example, but it seems like all three of them have some sort of issue. Y'all can agree with me, right? So for example, let's start with Sony, because Sony is kind of the industry leader right now. Whether you like Sony or not, they're kind of leading the industry. The PS5 is doing amazingly well. Talking about record revenue, they reached a certain amount of revenue that is a really big goal of theirs and all this stuff. But they have problems too, right? Very clearly, it's their live service chase. They've canceled so many of them. At one point, they wanted to have 12 out the door, which is insane. Why would you shoot yourself in the foot like that? Right? We had Helldivers, which is doing very well. Airhell Games is supporting it. They're doing a very good job supporting the game. It's making a decent amount of money, all this stuff. But the fact that they wanted so many, they bought Bungie on the premise that they will be able to kind of guide all these different developers into making very successful live service games. They want to have 12 running at one time, which is obscene, because you have to understand that people have very limited time. So people are going to pick their live service game, one, maybe two of them, unless you just sit at home and play games all day. And even then, you're probably only going to pick the one or two that you like, and all the other ones don't matter. So making all these games that are supposed to be a game as a service, all coming from the same publisher, that means you're going to have some, on the best end, you're going to have some that work, Helldivers, and you're going to have some that don't, Concord. Concord failed so bad that game came off after a week. That game got taken off the store. It got delisted it was actually a little bit longer than a week, but a week. And that whole, that whole period of wanting to have all these live service games made and then 8 of them getting canceled now means that Sony doesn't have anything of real value to show. Well, they don't have a lot. Well, Ghost of Yotei comes out at the end of the year. Death Stranding 2 comes out in a bit. But outside of that, we know Sony for their first party lineup. We know Sony for their single player titles, but they focus so much on live services, that most of which will never see the light of day, that it feels like their entire output just got pushed. So the thing we know Sony for, sorry, I am chewing on a cough drop and it's getting stuck in places I don't want it to. But the fact that their lineup has consisted of all these live service titles that are now gone means that the things that we are looking forward to are going to be even further spread out. So outside of Ghost of Yotei and I believe Lost Soul Aside, those are really the only two games that are being made by Sony or published by Sony that are coming out. Death Stranding 2, I keep forgetting about that one. But then outside of that, most of the other games that they're talking about are getting released in 2026 or 2027. A lot of the games that we saw got announced too early. We don't see any more information about them. We don't see anything about Wolverine, right? So we're seeing a very arrogant Sony again. If y'all remember the PS3 era, right? Sony did very well with the PlayStation, especially considering the fact that they were supposed to be partnering with Nintendo. Nintendo left them high and dry, so they kind of entered the market out of spite, really. And the PS1 did great. The PlayStation 2 was a runaway success. It did astronomically well. They had two very successful generations, and now the PS3 comes out and Sony's like, oh, everything we touch turns to gold. You're going to buy what you want to, and they had to get humbled really quick. Not only did they release a console on the market that was too expensive and they had no empathy for it, but they had competition that released a year early and took advantage of that. So they had to really sit down, think about what they really needed to do about the PS3, and they got humbled. So they lowered the price, they removed things that weren't necessary in the console, and they started putting out the most important thing that a game console needs, which is games. We saw so many games. Uncharted 3. We saw Uncharted 3. We saw Uncharted. We saw God of War 3. We saw so many different titles in the PS3 era. Infamous. We saw so much. We saw so many games. And that propelled the PS3 to land on a good note. PS4 did very well, and they also took advantage of Microsoft's fuck-ups. But then now we're on the PS5, and we see that arrogant Sony again. I'm hoping that the management changes are going to kind of rein that in, and we can get back to doing the thing that we like about PlayStation, which is the games that they make. Sony has some very powerful IPs. Not quite as powerful or like legacy as like Nintendo, but they have some very powerful IPs, and we need to get back to that. Sure, experiment, sure, find your live service stuff, whatever the case, but you can't leave that stuff behind. And that's the general sentiment around PlayStation right now. But we'll get into Xbox in a bit, but Microsoft releasing games on PlayStation and those being the top selling games month over month because Sony isn't dropping anything kind of looks weird. Right? Like, Sony's making money off of that, sure, but it kind of looks weird, right? So that's Sony, right? Now we go to Microsoft. And Microsoft's been kind of in a weird place ever since the Xbox One. They were doing very well with the 360, and I really persist in the fact that like they didn't take the time that and the success that they have with the Xbox 360 and really compound on the things that are needed. Once again, were games. The Xbox One tried to win on gimmicks. The gimmicks weren't good enough. The gimmicks, honestly, were not the things that people wanted, and we saw an arrogant Microsoft, but they got humbled real quick because the PS4 just ran away. I think as of now, because like Microsoft is still finding footing, and they're kind of in a position where they got some things that work, and more importantly, they have games that people want to play. But arrogant for the 360. When the Xbox One was made, they essentially had that same kind of mentality that the PS3 that Sony had with the PS3. This is what we want to do. You're gonna buy it or you're not. What was I saying? Sorry. Microsoft it's difficult for Microsoft right now to have like a consistent footing, right? And a lot of their messaging is very confusing. So Microsoft struggled with software for a while. They had Halo, they had Gears, they had Fable for a while until they stopped making Fable. Now they're making another one. They had Forza, and that was kind of it. The 360 generation should have been an opportunity to really like nail down some things outside of those things, but it really wasn't. Since the Xbox One and Xbox Series up until recently, the games that they've been releasing haven't been the best. Like Halo came released with issues. Crackdown, the last Crackdown was terrible. There was just a lot of stuff that went wrong. Game Pass was kind of their saving grace because it put Microsoft back in the conversation. Game Pass, even with the changes and the price raise that Game Pass had recently, is still the best deal in gaming. It still is. But now, with Game Pass being what it is, with Microsoft now, after acquiring so many studios, so many publishers at this point, and having a steady output of games, like this year, they've had a lot come out. They had Avowed, they had Oblivion Remastered, they had South of Midnight, they had Doom, they had a lot of games come out at the very beginning of the year. So like the output they have of Xbox Game Studios games is really high. But now they have Game Pass on console, on Xbox, they have Game Pass on PC, and now they're also releasing most of those games, not all. Avowed and South of Midnight is still single platform, but they're releasing a lot of their games now on other platforms. So while Phil Spencer or whoever keeps saying that we have confidence in the console space, we're making new hardware and all that stuff, it looks weird because now their games are going to other platforms. So People are wondering if Game Pass is doing enough for them, myself included, honestly. People are wondering if Microsoft is going to leave the hardware space altogether and go the route of Sega, where since now the games are showing up on multiple systems, multiple platforms, I should say, and they're kind of focused on a subscription service being their bread and butter, if they're just going to abandon the console space altogether. So it's like, you say we love hardware, but the things that you're doing make people think something else. You say only 4 games are going to be on multi-platform, but now you're putting more out there. So it's like their messaging is very inconsistent. And I feel like if they were to kind of like rein everything in and just be truthful instead of saying, oh, we don't know what's going to happen and being coy about it, then I think that would really put more confidence in the company, because then they are presenting that their choices are good ones and they're confident about them instead of just being wishy-washy. And I understand there's a lot of corporate corporate speak involved in that, but I think that's their main issue. Not the fact that they're quote unquote going third party, because that one, that has yet to be seen, and two, there exists an argument that them putting first party content on other platforms isn't necessarily a bad thing for the brand itself. But once again, I think the fact that they keep jumping back and forth behind their messaging is the thing that's really bugging people, right? Going back to Microsoft really quick, the fact that they had to raise prices recently is really, really weird. I think they're the one that just could not afford to do that. But that also, I think, still makes me believe that the subscription is what they really care about. Because honestly speaking, the hardware that's in third place, quote unquote, when you're looking at the other two, Microsoft, Sony and Nintendo, is not the one that needs raising price. Especially, and that looks really weird now, especially that that Sony announced a sale. So it's just like, why, right? Nintendo, I think, is the one that's the most stable, but even they have a bit of a problem. Nintendo's a big thing right now. Actually, theirs is a little bit harder to pin, because Nintendo's actually been the most successful, I think. The Switch has been doing gangbusters. Switch 2s are selling out. They're getting ready to release another one. The Nintendo problem, I think, exists from pricing. Switch 2 came out to be more than what a lot of people thought, myself included. I expected it to be $399. It's $449 or $499 if you want to get the Mario Kart 8 bundle. And they were also the first manufacturer to announce that they were going to raise the standard price of games. Now, there's a lot of misinformation. The only game so far that is going to be $80, $79.99, is Mario Kart World. And if you get the Mario Kart World bundle, you're essentially paying $49 for it, because we're only raising the price to $50. So if you buy the game outside of the bundle, it is $80. That is the only game right now that, at least from what I saw, that's the only launch title that is going to be $80. Even Donkey Kong, when that comes out, is going to be the standard $70 right now. But the fact that that is even a thing, especially for Nintendo, which a lot of people view like Nintendo compared to Sony and Microsoft to be kind of like the little brother. Like the console is not as powerful. It doesn't do the games aren't as graphically intensive and all this other stuff. So like that's the thing that is very odd to come from Nintendo. They have to. Their value proposition, I think, is a lot higher because of that. And that's going to be something that is like, we'll see if they're able to do that or not. And also, when we get to the point where most games are $80, let's say, for example, and we've seen things from like EA that said they'd have no plans of raising the price of games as far as $70, but we have seen Microsoft say that games going forward will launch at $80. Once again, that's weird. But when we see that, and we see, of course, the price of games raised, we're kind of going to blame Nintendo for that, because they were the first to do it. A lot of people blame Sony for getting the standard price of games to $70, even though technically I believe that was 2K that did that first and Sony did it after. But still, Sony being a leader in the space, a lot of people blame Sony for the standard price of games going up to $70. Now that's going to happen with Nintendo because they were the first ones to do $80, and Microsoft, seeing that, followed suit. So that's their problem, is their value proposition. They have to work really hard to justify why they're going to $80, especially because people don't see Nintendo games as being worth that much. Hell, to be honest, typically Nintendo games are the ones that are pirated the most. Emulation for Switch was very lucrative, is what I'll say. People were on that stuff immediately, and people are already getting their hands on Switch 2 and are trying to jailbreak it so they can do the same thing. Nintendo games, people love to pirate, emulate Nintendo games, and they'll do it immediately. Most people don't think Nintendo games are worth the price, but they want to play them. So if that's the case, and Nintendo's now saying, hey, these are going up in price, it's kind of up to them to make us really think that these games are worth it, right? Especially as being the pioneer of this price point, right? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I think that makes sense. I was trying to put that into words, but like, yeah, all of them have some sort of problem. With Sony, it's their arrogance. Sony's very, very, very arrogant right now, and I hope that gets reined in. Microsoft is messaging, and Nintendo is value proposition. Nobody's perfect in this industry, and I hope we kind of get back to the point, because like I said, gaming is strange. Like, there's controversy everywhere at this point, and it's like, I just want to play some cool games. That's really it. That's really all. I just want to turn on my console, or at this point turn on my PC, because I'm using my PC for gaming more, and play some nice games. I don't want to think about all this other nonsense, all these politics that are in games. Not talking about, of course, like, you know, the woke agenda or anything like that, but it's just like, why is everything so weird?